I'm Odessa Thorne, 52, and after 3 decades of gutting failing companies for profit, I just walked away with a $3.2 million golden parachute that was supposed to be the start of my forever. The ink was barely dry on the separation agreement from the firm. I sat in my Aston Martin in the underground garage, staring at the signature that just bought my freedom. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from an adrenaline rush I hadn't felt since my first hostile takeover in the 90s. I had spent 30 years being the woman people feared, the grim reaper of Wall Street, dismantling legacies and stripping assets. Now I was just Odessa. I was free. I looked at the passenger seat. Sitting there sweating in the afternoon sun was a bottle of 1996 Krug Close Dambonnet. It cost more than my first car. It was for Jordan. Jordan, my wife of 20 years, the artist who softened my edges, the woman who taught me that not everything in life had to be a transaction. I checked my watch. It was 2:00 p.m. I wasn't supposed to be home until 7. We had a dinner reservation at Le Bernardin to celebrate, but I couldn't wait. I wanted to see her face when I told her we never had to worry about quarterly reports again. I wanted to tell her we could finally buy that villa in Tuscany she had been pinning to her vision board for 5 years. I took the private elevator up to the penthouse. The ride was smooth, silent, and fast. My stomach fluttered. I felt like a teenager skipping school. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the foyer of our sanctuary. The floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the living room in aggressive afternoon light, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. It was quiet, too quiet. Jordan. I called out, but my voice didn't carry the command it usually did. It was soft, almost hopeful. No answer. I frowned. Her car was downstairs. Her studio door was open, but the easel was empty. I walked further into the apartment, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floors. The bottle of Krug was heavy in my hand, the condensation making my palms slick. Then I heard it. It was a sound that didn't belong in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. A low, throaty laugh. Jordan's laugh, but it wasn't the polite chuckle she gave at charity galas. It was the raw, uninhibited laugh she usually saved for our private moments after 3 glasses of wine. I stopped. The air in the hallway felt suddenly thin. Another voice joined hers, a deep, resonant baritone. My blood ran cold. I knew that voice. I had heard that voice every day for 15 years. I had heard it on conference calls, on golf courses, and at my own wedding toast. It was Julian, my best friend. My lawyer, the man who had just negotiated my $3.2 million exit package 3 hours ago. Stop, Jordan giggled, the sound muffled, likely by a pillow or a shoulder. She'll be home at 7, we have time. We always have time, babe, Julian's voice purred. Besides, once the wire transfer hits, she's going to be too distracted counting her money to notice anything. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My vision blurred at the edges. The hallway seemed to stretch out, elongating like a nightmare corridor. I wasn't breathing. I couldn't breathe. I took a step forward, then another. I had to see, I had to be sure. This was a misunderstanding. This was a surprise party. This was anything but what my gut was screaming it was. I reached the master bedroom door. It was ajar, just a sliver of darkness cutting through the white frame. I didn't push it open. I didn't storm in. I did what I always did in business. I observed. I gathered intelligence. I peered through the crack. The sight hit me with the force of a physical blow. Clothes were scattered across the Persian rug, Jordan's silk blouse, Julian's tailored suit jacket that I had helped him pick out. And there on the bed where I slept every night were 2 bodies tangled in a chaotic mess of sheets. I saw the tattoo on the shoulder, the small sparrow. Jordan, I saw the scar on the lower back from a skiing accident in Aspen. Julian. They were moving with a familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. The way his hand rested on her hip, the way she arched into him, this was a routine. This was a relationship. I can't believe she actually signed it, Jordan whispered, her voice drifting out into the hallway to stab me in the chest. 3 million, that's enough for us to start over, isn't it? More than enough, Julian groaned. We just have to play the part a little longer, let her think she's winning. The bottle of Krug slipped from my fingers. Reflexes honed by years of squash caught it before it hit the marble. I clutched it against my chest, the cold glass burning my skin. I didn't drop it, I didn't scream. I didn't kick the door down, I froze. The woman who had just negotiated a multi-million-dollar deal, the woman who could stare down a boardroom of hostile shareholders without blinking, felt her knees unlock. I slumped against the wall, sliding down silently until I hit the floor. My entire life was a lie. My marriage, my best friendship, my retirement. They weren't just sleeping together. They were counting my money. They were planning a future on the corpse of my career. I sat there on the cold floor, listening to the rhythmic creaking of my own bed, clutching a $2,000 bottle of champagne. A single tear rolled down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away instantly. Sadness was a liability. Grief was an inefficiency. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lilies and betrayal. When I opened my eyes, the tears were gone. The liquidator had just entered the building. I'm Odessa Thorne, 52, and after 30 years of ruthlessly dismantling corporations, I just realized the most hostile takeover of my life was happening inside my own bedroom. I was still sitting on the cold marble floor of the hallway, the bottle of Krug pressed against my chest like a shield. The initial shock that had knocked me off my feet was beginning to recede, retreating like a tide to reveal something sharper and far more dangerous underneath. My breathing, which had been erratic and shallow, slowed into a rhythmic, predatory cadence. I needed to be sure. I needed to hear the rest. In business, you never strike based on a rumor. You strike based on irrefutable data. I needed the data. I forced my legs to work, the muscles twitching with a surplus of adrenaline that had nowhere to go. I stood up, smoothing the front of my silk skirt with a trembling hand. Silence was my ally now. I took off my heels, leaving them by the console table, and crept back toward the master bedroom in my stocking feet. The door was still ajar, that sliver of darkness mocking me. I pushed the door open just an inch further. The sight was a jagged piece of glass to the heart. Jordan was wrapped in the arms of Julian, my business partner, my confidant, the man who knew where all the bodies were buried because he had helped me dig the graves. The betrayal felt like a physical blade sliding between my ribs, twisting with every beat of my heart. They weren't just having sex, they were comfortable. That was the worst part. They were tangled together with the ease of a couple who had done this 1,000 times before. Then came the words that would haunt me until the day I ruined them both. God, she was insufferable during the negotiations today, Julian said, tracing a lazy line down Jordan's spine. Lecturing me about securing the future while I was trying to figure out how fast we could liquidate her portfolio once she signed. Jordan laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound I didn't recognize. Odessa doesn't know how to live, Julian. She only knows how to accumulate. She's boring. She's a walking spreadsheet in designer heels. She kissed his chest right over his heart. But her boring work ethic is going to pay for our villa. Did the transfer go through? Every cent, Julian smirked, kissing the top of her head. $3.2 million. It's finally funding a real life, our life. We just have to endure the retirement dinner tonight, smile while she gives one of her dry toasts, and then in a few months you file for divorce. We take half of the rest and we disappear. I deserve it, Jordan murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. I put up with her coldness for 20 years. I earned this payout. My vision tunneled into a sharp, narrow point of white-hot rage. The hallway, the walls, the expensive art we had bought together in Paris, it all dissolved. There was only the sound of their voices and the pulsating rhythm of my own blood in my ears. They weren't just betraying me, they were erasing me. They were rewriting our entire history as a transaction where I was the mark. Boring. I had worked 80-hour weeks to buy her that studio. I had missed birthdays to secure our retirement. I had gutted my own soul to ensure she never had to worry about the price of paint or canvas or wine. And to her, I was just a bank account with a pulse. I didn't scream. I didn't burst into the room and demand answers. That's what a heartbroken wife would do. That's what Odessa the victim would do. But Odessa the victim died on that floor moments ago. I simply backed away. I moved like a ghost, stepping backward one silent foot at a time until I was back in the foyer. I picked up my heels. I picked up the bottle of Krug. My hands were steady now. The trembling was gone, replaced by a terrifying, icy calm. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors slid open, I stepped inside and watched the penthouse. My home, my sanctuary, my crime scene disappear as the doors closed. The ride down to the garage felt like a descent into the underworld. I wasn't sad anymore. Sadness is a passive emotion. What I felt was kinetic, it was fuel. I reached my Aston Martin and slid into the driver's seat. The leather creaked, the only sound in the suffocating silence of the underground garage. I placed the champagne bottle in the passenger seat again. It wouldn't be for Jordan, not anymore. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick was perfect. My hair was immaculate, but my eyes were different. They were dead. They were the eyes of the grim reaper of Wall Street, the woman who had made grown men cry in boardrooms. Julian thought he was smart. He thought he was the lawyer who knew all the tricks, but he forgot one thing. He was the one who wrote the contracts, but I was the one who executed them. He had just handed me $3.2 million in liquid cash and freed me from the firm. I had no job, I had no schedule, I had absolutely nothing to do but destroy them. Boring, I whispered to the empty car. I started the engine. The roar of the V12 bounced off the concrete walls, a primal growl that matched the beast waking up inside me. I checked my watch. 2:15 p.m. I had 5 hours until dinner. 5 hours to construct a mask of ignorance. 5 hours to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. I wasn't going to confront them tonight. Oh no, that would be too easy. That would be mercy. I was going to let them think they won. I was going to let them spend the money in their heads. I was going to let them dream of Tuscany and freedom. And then, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, I was going to dismantle their lives until they were left with nothing but each other. And the realization that they had messed with the wrong, boring woman. I put the car in gear and drove out into the blinding afternoon sun. The game had just begun. The silence of the underground garage was heavier than the grave. I sat in the driver's seat of my Aston Martin, the engine cold, the darkness pressing against the tinted windows. My hands were clamped around the leather steering wheel, trembling so violently that my massive diamond engagement ring clicked rhythmically against the console. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. I stared at the concrete wall in front of me, but I wasn't seeing gray stone. I was seeing the timeline of the last 6 months reassembling itself in my mind, shifting from a montage of happy memories into a dossier of evidence. The ski trip Julian took in February while I was closing the merger in Tokyo. He came back with a tan, not windburn. Jordan had been visiting her mother that same week. The sudden interest Jordan took in my portfolio 3 months ago. Are we diversified enough, honey? Maybe we should be more liquid. The pressure Julian applied last week to finalize the buyout agreement immediately. Let's get the cash in the account, Odessa. You deserve to see the zeros. Don't wait for the quarterly payout. I let out a breath that shuddered in my chest, a ragged, pathetic sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the nausea that rolled through my gut like a rogue wave. They weren't just sleeping together. That would have been a betrayal of the heart, a pedestrian tragedy I could have perhaps grieved and survived. No, this was far more surgical. This was a hostile takeover. They had structured my life for liquidation. I looked down at the passenger seat where the bottle of Krug lay. The gold foil glinted in the dim garage light. That bottle cost more than my father made in a month when I was growing up. I had bought it to celebrate our freedom. They were going to drink it to celebrate my destruction. 3.2 million, I whispered. The number tasted like ash. That money was supposed to be the seed capital for the foundation I wanted to start. It was supposed to be the safety net that let us travel without checking exchange rates. To them, it was a severance package. They were firing me from my own marriage. A sob clawed its way up my throat, hot and acidic. I slammed my hand against the dashboard. The sharp pain in my palm grounded me. Stop it. The command rang out in my head with the voice I used when a junior analyst missed a projection. Assess the damage, calculate the risk, execute the strategy. I opened my eyes. The tears that had been threatening to spill were gone, reabsorbed into the dry, arid landscape of my rage. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked terrified. Her skin was pale, her eyes wide and wet. I hated her. She was weak. She was a victim. I reached up and adjusted the mirror. I took a deep breath through my nose, holding it for 4 seconds, then exhaling for 4. It was a technique I used before firing entire departments. When I looked back at the mirror, the terrified woman was gone. In her place was the CEO, the liquidator, the entity that had earned the nickname the Iron Maiden of Wall Street long before Iron Man made the suit cool. My sorrow evaporated, replaced by a cold, metallic clarity. It was a sensation I knew well. It was the absence of empathy. It was the engaging of the gears that turned human beings into assets and liabilities. Jordan and Julian were no longer my wife and best friend. They were underperforming assets. They were liabilities carrying a high degree of risk. And in my world, when an asset becomes toxic, you don't cry about it. You divest. You strip it for parts. You burn it down to the bedrock so nothing can ever grow there again. I reached for my phone. My fingers were steady now. I opened my banking app. Face ID let me in. There it was, pending transaction, $3,200,000. It had hit the account 40 minutes ago. They thought the money was theirs. They thought the wire hitting the joint account was the finish line. They didn't understand that possession is 9/10 of the law, but access is everything. I didn't move the money, not yet. That would trigger an alert. If I moved it now, Julian would get a notification on his phone while he was still putting his clothes back on. He would know I knew. The element of surprise was the only leverage I had. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel victorious. I needed them to walk into that dinner tonight thinking they were the smartest people in the room. I swiped out of the app and opened my calendar. 7:30 p.m. retirement celebration. Le Bernardin, 5 hours. I had 5 hours to construct the perfect mask. I had to sit across from them, break bread, drink wine, and listen to their toasts. I had to let Julian clap me on the shoulder. I had to let Jordan kiss my cheek with those lips I now knew had been all over him. A dark, twisted smile touched my lips. It felt foreign, sharp. They called me boring. They called me a spreadsheet. They were right. I am a spreadsheet. I am a ledger of debts and credits. And they had just run up a deficit they could never repay. I pushed the start button on the Aston Martin. The V12 engine roared to life, the sound echoing off the concrete walls like a war cry. I shifted into gear, the movement precise and fluid. I wasn't driving home. I wasn't going to a hotel to weep into a pillow. I was going to the office. I had files to pull. I had forensic accountants to call on secure lines. I needed to know everything Julian had touched in the last 10 years. Every contract, every side deal, every expense report. If he was sloppy enough to screw my wife in my bed, he was sloppy enough to leave a paper trail. And Jordan, my beautiful, artistic, free-spirited wife, I knew exactly how to hurt her. She didn't care about money for the sake of money. She cared about status. She cared about how she was perceived. She wanted the villa in Tuscany not for the view but for the envy of her friends. I would take the money, yes. But first I would take their reputations. I would take their future. I pulled the car out of the dark garage and into the blinding afternoon sun of Manhattan. I flipped down the visor and put on my sunglasses. The game had changed. They were playing for a divorce settlement. I was playing for blood. I'm Odessa, 42 years old, and I hold the kill switch to the lives of the two people I loved most. I didn't drive to the office. The office was too exposed, too public, and I needed a bunker. I pulled the Aston Martin up to the curb of the Whitby, a place discreet enough for affairs and secure enough for war planning. I handed the valet $100 bill and told him to keep the car close. Checking in, I told the receptionist, sliding a black Centurion card across the marble counter. Reservation for V. Stone. Victoria Stone. It was a pseudonym I hadn't used since doing hostile takeover reconnaissance in my 20s. Saying it out loud felt like slipping on a suit of armor. Up in the suite, I didn't look at the view of Midtown. I drew the heavy velvet curtains, plunging the room into a twilight gloom that matched the coldness spreading through my chest. I stripped off my blazer, kicked off my heels, and sat cross-legged on the king-sized bed with my laptop. It was time to perform the autopsy before the bodies were even dead. I logged into the firm's shadow server. Julian thought he was the only one with admin keys to the secondary accounts, but he was arrogant. I had built the architecture of our billing system 5 years ago. I knew where the backdoors were because I was the one who installed them. I bypassed the security protocols and pulled up his personal trading accounts. Red, a sea of red. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rapid-fire thud that had nothing to do with sorrow and everything to do with the thrill of the hunt. I traced the transactions with trembling fingers. Wire transfers to offshore sports books. Massive cash withdrawals at casinos in Macau. He was bleeding liquidity. He wasn't just broke, he was underwater. That explained the desperation for the buyout. He didn't want my retirement money for a vacation. He needed it to cover his embezzlement before the quarterly audit exposed him to the federal authorities. "Got you," I whispered. The sound was harsh in the silent room. Then I opened the digital folder labeled personal. I pulled up the PDF of our post-nuptial agreement. Jordan had signed it 3 years ago without reading it, too busy planning her gallery opening to bother with what she called boring legal jargon. I scrolled to Clause 14, Section B. The infidelity clause. It was draconian. It was brutal. It stated that in the event of proven adultery, the offending party forfeited all claims to marital assets acquired after the date of the marriage, including any interest in my business holdings or their liquidation value. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had legally signed away her right to every single penny of that $3.2 million. A cold, electric surge of adrenaline spiked through my veins, making the hair on my arms stand up. My hands started to shake, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was power, pure, unadulterated power. I had the leverage. I had the evidence waiting to be gathered. And best of all, I had the element of surprise. They expected Odessa the wife, the boring, reliable provider who would cry and ask why. They had no idea they were about to have dinner with Odessa the executioner. I checked the time, 5:45 p.m. I closed the laptop with a snap. I stood up and walked to the bathroom mirror, gripping the porcelain sink until my knuckles turned white. I stared into my own eyes, forcing the deadness out, forcing a light to appear. I would go to dinner. I would smile. I would toast to our bright future. I would let them think they had gotten away with the heist of the century. I applied a fresh coat of blood-red lipstick. I bared my teeth at my reflection. "Showtime," I said. The snare was set. All they had to do was walk into it. I'm Odessa, 42, a self-made multimillionaire, and I was about to give the performance of a lifetime to destroy the two people I loved most. I sat in the back of a yellow taxi, watching my own house come into view. I had left the Aston Martin with the valet at the Whitby and taken a cab to sell the narrative. I needed to look like I had just dragged myself off a red-eye flight from London, not like I had spent the night plotting financial homicide in a hotel suite 5 miles away. My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists, digging my nails into my palms until the sharp bite of pain centered me. "Breathe, Odessa. You aren't the victim. You are the predator." I rubbed my knuckles into my eyes hard until I saw stars. I needed them red. I needed them puffy. I needed to look exhausted, emotional, and completely vulnerable. I messed up my hair, pulling a few strands loose from my bun so they framed my face in a chaotic, tired halo. I paid the driver and stepped out onto the pavement. The morning air was crisp, but I felt feverish. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk empty, save for a few hotel pillows I'd stuffed in there for weight, and dragged it up the driveway. The gravel crunched under my boots. Every step felt like walking toward an executioner's block, but I forced my shoulders to slump. I forced my gait to drag. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. "Honey," I called out, my voice cracked perfectly. "I'm home." Silence for a beat. Then the rapid staccato of footsteps on hardwood. Jordan appeared in the hallway. She was wearing a silk kimono I had bought her in Kyoto. Her hair was tousled, her face fresh scrubbed and beautiful. For a split second, my heart lurched with the old instinct to love her. Then I remembered the sounds she made with Julian on the audio recording, and the love turned into something black and viscous in my gut. "Oh, Tessa," she squealed. She ran to me. She threw her arms around my neck. I didn't flinch. I didn't recoil. I wrapped my arms around her waist and pulled her close, burying my face in her neck. I inhaled. She smelled like jasmine and betrayal. "I missed you so much," she cooed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that I now recognized as artificial sweetener, cloying and fake. "I missed you too," I lied. The words tasted like ash. I pulled back, keeping my hands on her waist. I let my eyes roam over her face, feigning adoration while I searched for cracks in her mask. There were none. She was a better actor than I was. Then I saw it. Her eyes flicked down just for a microsecond. She was looking at the diamond tennis bracelet on my right wrist. It was a 5-carat piece worth roughly $40,000. I saw the calculation in her pupils. She wasn't looking at a gift from her wife. She was looking at a line item on a balance sheet she thought she was about to inherit. You look exhausted, baby, she said, reaching up to stroke my cheek. Her fingers felt like brands. It's done, I whispered, letting my shoulders drop as if a great weight had been lifted. The wire hit. The deal is closed. I'm out, Jordan. I'm finally out. Her eyes widened. The greed flared bright and undeniable before she masked it with a smile of supportive joy. Oh my God, she gasped. Really, it's all in the account? Every penny, I said, $3.2 million liquid. I'm so proud of you, she said, and then she kissed me. It took every ounce of discipline I had honed over 20 years on the trading floor not to bite her lip off. Her mouth was soft, familiar, and toxic. I kissed her back, soft and weary, playing the role of the devoted provider who had just secured her queen's future. Where's Julian? I asked, pulling away and wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, disguising the motion as a yawn. I need to tell him, he's going to flip. I'm right here, boss. I looked up. Julian was leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, holding a mug of my coffee. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked comfortable. He looked like he lived here, my best friend, the man I had started my first LLC with in a garage. He grinned, that charming, lopsided grin that had disarmed clients for decades. You did it, he asked, raising the mug in a toast. I did it, I said, walking past Jordan to embrace him. I hugged him tight, slapping his back. I felt the tension in his frame. He was worried. He needed that money to cover his tracks. You're a legend, Odessa, he said into my ear. A monumental legend. We did it, I corrected, pulling back to look at them both. I let tears well up in my eyes. It wasn't hard. I just had to think about how much I wanted to scream. I couldn't have done this without you two. You're my family, my rocks. They exchanged a look, a quick, subtle glance of relief. They bought it. They thought the sheep had walked right into the slaughterhouse. I don't want to just sit here, I said, injecting a sudden manic energy into my voice. I want to celebrate tonight. Tonight? Jordan asked, glancing at the mess in the kitchen. You just got in, don't you want to sleep? No, I said firmly. I'm running on adrenaline. I want to host a dinner. A massive retirement and partnership celebration. Just the three of us, but I want to go all out. I want to open the 82 Petrus. I want to wear the gala gowns. I want to toast to our new life. I watched them. I saw the hook catch in their mouths. They loved the idea of the 82 Petrus. They loved the idea of a new life. They thought I was toasting to a future of leisure, unaware I was planning a funeral for their reputations. That sounds amazing, Julian said, his eyes gleaming. Le Bernardin? No, I said. Here, in the formal dining room, I want it intimate. I want it perfect. I'll have the caterers set everything up while I nap. Okay, Jordan beamed, clapping her hands. A celebration, I love it. Good, I said. I picked up my suitcase. I'm going to shower and crash for 4 hours. Wake me up at 6. I'll come up and tuck you in, Jordan offered. No, I said a little too sharply. I softened my tone immediately. No, babe, I'm gross. Airplane air. I just need to scrub the grime off and pass out. I'll see you at dinner. I turned my back on them. I walked up the stairs, listening to the silence below. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel their smug satisfaction radiating like heat. As soon as I turned the corner of the landing and was out of sight, my face collapsed. The smile slid off like melting wax. My lips curled back into a snarl. My breath came in ragged, silent gasps. I walked into the master bedroom, our bedroom, and locked the door. I leaned back against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were celebrating. Downstairs right now, they were probably high-fiving. They were probably kissing. They were counting the money. I looked at my phone. I had the forensic accounting report queued up in my inbox. I had the printout of the infidelity clause in my briefcase. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to sharpen the knife. Tonight, over $5,000 wine and catered lobster. I wasn't just going to divorce my wife and fire my partner. I was going to detonate their entire world, and I was going to do it with a smile on my face. The trap was set. The bait was taken. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. Just wait, I thought. Just wait until dessert. I'm Odessa, 42, a self-made multimillionaire, and I was about to give the performance of a lifetime to destroy the two people I loved most. I sat in the back of a yellow taxi, watching the familiar limestone facade of my townhouse come into view. I had purposely left the Aston Martin with the valet at the Whitby. I needed to sell the narrative. I needed to look like I had just dragged myself off a red-eye flight from London, not like I had spent the last 5 nights in a hotel suite 3 miles away, meticulously dismantling my own life. My hands were shaking in my lap. I clenched them into fists, digging my nails into my palms until the sharp bite of pain centered me. Breathe, Odessa. You aren't the victim anymore. You are the predator. I thought about the confirmation email I had received at 4:00 a.m. $3.2 million. It was gone. It had been moved through a series of shell companies and landed safely in a Cook Islands trust that was legally bulletproof against marital asset division. I thought about the other email. The anonymous tip to the SEC regarding Marcus's creative accounting practices at the firm. I had attached the PDFs. I had attached the audio logs. By Monday morning, Julian wouldn't just be broke, he would be under federal investigation. I rubbed my knuckles into my eyes hard until I saw stars. I needed them red. I needed them puffy. I needed to look exhausted, emotional, and completely vulnerable. I messed up my hair, pulling a few strands loose from my bun so they framed my face in a chaotic, tired halo. I paid the driver and stepped out onto the pavement. The morning air was crisp, but I felt feverish. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, empty, save for a few hotel pillows I'd stuffed in there for weight, and dragged it up the driveway. The gravel crunched under my boots. Every step felt like walking toward an executioner's block, but I forced my shoulders to slump. I forced my gait to drag. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open. "Honey," I called out, my voice cracked perfectly. "I'm home." Silence for a beat, then the rapid staccato of footsteps on hardwood. Jordan appeared in the hallway. She was wearing a silk kimono I had bought her in Kyoto. Her hair was tousled, her face fresh scrubbed and beautiful. For a split second, my heart lurched with the old instinct to love her. Then I remembered the sounds she made with Julian on the audio recording, and the love turned into something black and viscous in my gut. "Oh, Tessa," she squealed. She ran to me, she threw her arms around my neck. I didn't flinch. I didn't recoil. I wrapped my arms around her waist and pulled her close, burying my face in her neck. I inhaled. She smelled like jasmine and betrayal. "I missed you so much," she cooed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that I now recognized as artificial sweetener, cloying and fake. "I missed you too," I lied. The words tasted like ash. I pulled back, keeping my hands on her waist. I let my eyes roam over her face, feigning adoration while I searched for cracks in her mask. There were none. She was a better actor than I was. Then I saw it. Her eyes flicked down, just for a microsecond. She was looking at the diamond tennis bracelet on my right wrist. It was a 5-carat piece, worth roughly $40,000. I saw the calculation in her pupils. She wasn't looking at a gift from her wife, she was looking at a line item on a balance sheet she thought she was about to inherit. "You look exhausted, baby," she said, reaching up to stroke my cheek. Her fingers felt like brands. It's done, I whispered, letting my shoulders drop as if a great weight had been lifted. The wire hit. The deal is closed. I'm out, Jordan. I'm finally out. Her eyes widened. The greed flared, bright and undeniable, before she masked it with a smile of supportive joy. Oh my God, she gasped. Really, it's all in the account? Every penny, I said. $3.2 million liquid. I'm so proud of you, she said, and then she kissed me. It took every ounce of discipline I had honed over 20 years on the trading floor not to bite her lip off. Her mouth was soft, familiar, and toxic. I kissed her back, soft and weary, playing the role of the devoted provider who had just secured her queen's future. Where's Julian? I asked, pulling away and wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, disguising the motion as a yawn. I need to tell him, he's going to flip. I'm right here, boss. I looked up. Julian was leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, holding a mug of my coffee. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. He looked comfortable. He looked like he lived here. My best friend, the man I had started my first LLC with in a garage. He grinned, that charming, lopsided grin that had disarmed clients for decades. You did it, he asked, raising the mug in a toast. I did it, I said, walking past Jordan to embrace him. I hugged him tight, slapping his back. I felt the tension in his frame. He was worried. He needed that money to cover his tracks. You're a legend, Odessa, he said into my ear. A monumental legend. We did it, I corrected, pulling back to look at them both. I let tears well up in my eyes. It wasn't hard. I just had to think about how much I wanted to scream. I couldn't have done this without you two. You're my family, my rocks. They exchanged a look, a quick, subtle glance of relief. They bought it. They thought the sheep had walked right into the slaughterhouse. They had no idea the sheep was carrying a detonator. I don't want to just sit here, I said, injecting a sudden manic energy into my voice. I want to celebrate tonight. Tonight, Jordan asked, glancing at the mess in the kitchen. You just got in, don't you want to sleep? No, I said firmly. I'm running on adrenaline. I want to host a dinner, a massive retirement and partnership celebration, just the three of us, but I want to go all out. I want to open the 82 Petrus. I want to wear the gala gowns. I want to toast to our new life. I watched them. I saw the hook catch in their mouths. They loved the idea of the 82 Petrus. They loved the idea of a new life. They thought I was toasting to a future of leisure, unaware I was planning a funeral for their reputations. That sounds amazing, Julian said, his eyes gleaming. Le Bernardin? No, I said. Here, in the formal dining room, I want it intimate. I want it perfect. I'll have the caterers set everything up while I nap. Okay, Jordan beamed, clapping her hands. A celebration, I love it. Good, I said. I picked up my suitcase. I'm going to shower and crash for 4 hours. Wake me up at 6. I'll come up and tuck you in, Jordan offered. No, I said a little too sharply. I softened my tone immediately. No, babe, I'm gross. Airplane air. I just need to scrub the grime off and pass out. I'll see you at dinner. I turned my back on them. I walked up the stairs, listening to the silence below. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel their smug satisfaction radiating like heat. I imagined them high-fiving the moment I turned the corner. As soon as I was out of sight, my face collapsed. The smile slid off like melting wax. My lips curled back into a snarl. My breath came in ragged, silent gasps. I walked into the master bedroom, our bedroom, and locked the door. I leaned back against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were celebrating. Downstairs right now they were probably kissing. They were counting the money. I looked at my phone. I had the forensic accounting report queued up in my inbox. I had the printout of the infidelity clause in my briefcase. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to sharpen the knife. Tonight, over $5,000 wine and catered lobster. I wasn't just going to divorce my wife and fire my partner. I was going to detonate their entire world, and I was going to do it with a smile on my face. The trap was set. The bait was taken. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. Just wait, I thought, just wait until dessert. I'm Odessa Vance, 42 years old, and tonight I am orchestrating the most expensive public execution in the history of New York high society. I stared at myself in the vanity mirror of the master bath. The woman staring back didn't look like a wife who had been cheated on. She looked like a weapon. I had spent the last 3 hours transforming myself from the exhausted traveler into a vision of untouchable power. I wore a backless emerald gown that cost more than my first car, the silk draping over my body like liquid money. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It had slowed to a cold, heavy thud like a war drum beating a funeral march. I applied the lipstick. Crimson. The color of a warning sign. Downstairs, the house was humming. I could feel the vibrations of the bass through the floorboards. When I had told Jordan and Marcus I wanted an intimate dinner, I had lied. As soon as I locked the bedroom door, I had texted my event planner. I told her to activate the emergency gala list. I told her to burn through the budget. I told her to get everyone who mattered in this city into my living room by 8:00 p.m. They were all there. The investors, the board members, the gossip columnists, the people whose opinions constituted the very oxygen Jordan and Marcus breathed. I stood up and smoothed the silk over my hips. I checked the hidden pocket in the folds of the dress. My phone was there recording. I opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The noise hit me instantly, a wall of laughter, clinking crystal and jazz. The smell of truffle oil and expensive perfume drifted up the stairs. It smelled like victory. I walked to the top of the grand staircase. The view was spectacular. My foyer had been transformed into a ballroom. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets weaved through the crowd with silver trays. The chandelier, which I had bought with my first bonus check 5 years ago, cast a glittering net of light over the heads of the city's elite. And there they were. Center stage. Jordan and Marcus stood near the foot of the stairs, side by side. They looked like the royal couple of the evening. Jordan was glowing, holding a flute of champagne, laughing at something a managing partner from Goldman was saying. Marcus stood with his hand possessively on the small of her back, a gesture so casual, so practiced, that it made bile rise in my throat. They thought this party was a celebration of our windfall. They thought they were the kings of the castle, welcoming the court to envy their new fortune. I watched Jordan lean into him. She whispered something in his ear, and he smirked. They looked comfortable. They looked safe. I took the first step down. My heels struck the marble with a sharp clack, heads turned. The conversation rippled and died away as I descended. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I walked with the slow, deliberate cadence of a judge entering a courtroom. Jordan looked up. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw the intensity in my eyes, but she recovered quickly. She raised her glass to me, playing the role of the proud spouse. Marcus straightened his tie, puffing out his chest. I stopped 3 steps from the bottom. I was still elevated above them. I needed them to look up at me. The room went silent. The jazz band cut the music. 300 eyes were fixed on me. Odessa, Marcus boomed, his voice full of false bonhomie. The woman of the hour, we were just toasting to your genius. To the future, Jordan added, beaming. I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. I looked at the head waiter, a man I had tipped $500 earlier that evening. I gave a single sharp nod. It wasn't a toast, it was a command. From the shadows of the hallways in the kitchen, a dozen servers emerged. They weren't carrying champagne. They weren't carrying hors d'oeuvres. They were carrying thick, cream-colored envelopes on silver trays. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. This was theater. This was drama. They loved it. They thought it was party favors. Maybe stock options. Maybe gift cards to the spa. The servers moved with military precision, handing an envelope to every key guest. The board members got one, the investors got one, and of course they handed one to Jordan and one to Marcus. "What's this?" Jordan asked, a playful giggle bubbling up in her throat. She looked at me, eyes sparkling. "A surprise bonus?" "Open it," I said. My voice was soft, but in the silence of the room, it carried like a gunshot. Jordan tore the seal. I watched her manicured fingers work the paper. I memorized the way the light caught on her diamond ring, my diamond ring. She pulled out the documents. There were 3 sheets of paper. The first was a high-resolution photograph. It was a still frame from the hidden camera I'd installed in the guest house. It showed Jordan and Marcus in a compromising, undeniable embrace dated 3 days ago while I was supposedly in London. The second was a forensic accounting summary of the unauthorized withdrawals Marcus had made from our joint business accounts to fund Jordan's shopping trips. The third was a notice to quit. An immediate eviction notice, effective upon receipt, barring her from the premises of the home solely titled in my name. I watched the color drain from her face. It didn't happen gradually. It happened all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. Her skin turned a sickly, translucent gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air on a dock. Next to her, Marcus had frozen. He was staring at his own envelope. His hands were shaking so violently the paper rattled. He looked from the photo to me, his eyes wide with a primal, animalistic terror. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a breakup. This was professional annihilation. The room was deadly quiet. Then the first guest gasped. A murmur started, low and buzzing, then grew into a roar as the photos were passed around. The elite of New York were looking at the evidence. They were looking at the numbers. Jordan looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, terrified, and pleading. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. There was only ruin. "Odessa," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" I leaned forward, gripping the banister until my knuckles turned white. I let a smile finally break across my face. It was cold. It was terrifying. "That," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "is my retirement speech." I pointed at the door. "Get out." The silence that followed my command wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. I watched Marcus's eyes dart across the pages in his trembling hands, his brain trying to catch up with the catastrophe unfolding in real time. He wasn't just looking at pictures of his infidelity anymore. He had flipped the page to the heavy cardstock with the Department of Justice seal embossed at the top. I took the final 3 steps down to the ballroom floor. Click, click, click. The sound of my heels on the marble was the only thing piercing the quiet, sharp and rhythmic like the cocking of a pistol. Marcus looked up, his face a mask of sweating, red-faced panic. He looked at the paper, then at the chairman of the board, who was standing near the buffet with a grim, satisfied nod. The chairman raised his glass in a silent salute, not to Marcus but to me. The termination wasn't a proposal, it was a done deal signed an hour ago in exchange for the evidence I'd handed over regarding Marcus's embezzlement. "You can't do this," Marcus rasped, his voice cracking. "Odessa, this is insane. A federal subpoena? You went to the feds?" I didn't stop walking until I was right in front of him. I was close enough to smell the sour tang of fear sweating through his expensive cologne. I didn't go to the feds, Marcus, I said, my voice smooth and loud enough for the front row to hear. I simply forwarded the discrepancies in your ledger to the appropriate authorities. As a dutiful wife and business partner, I couldn't be complicit in fraud. I'm sure you understand. His eyes bulged. The reality was hitting him like a freight train. He wasn't just losing his wife, he was losing his freedom. Desperation took over. He reached out, his fingers digging into my bare forearm, his grip bruising and frantic. You listen to me, he hissed, teeth bared, forgetting the crowd, forgetting the cameras. You destroy me, you destroy us. You think you're walking away with the money? I'll tie you up in court for decades. The crowd gasped. A few security guards I'd hired, dressed as guests, took a step forward, but I held up a hand. I didn't need them, not yet. I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up into his eyes with a gaze so cold it could have frozen hell over. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I just stared at him until the realization of who he was touching made him recoil. I brushed the spot where he had touched me as if wiping away a smudge of dirt. There is no us, Marcus, I said, and there is no money for you to fight over. I turned my attention to Jordan. She was paralyzed, clutching her eviction notice to her chest like a shield. She looked small. The arrogance that usually defined her posture had evaporated, leaving behind a frightened child in a stolen dress. She was staring at Marcus, realizing the golden goose hadn't just died, he was being led to the slaughterhouse. I stepped into her personal space. I leaned in close, my lips brushing the shell of her ear. I wanted this to be intimate. I wanted her to feel the heat of my breath as I delivered the final blow. The 3.2 million isn't in the joint account anymore, Jordan. I whispered, my voice a venomous purr. I moved it to an offshore trust at 4:59 p.m. today, protected by an ironclad infidelity clause that Marcus signed 6 years ago without reading. I felt her shudder. I pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. You're not just leaving my house, I continued, lowering my voice to a lethal drop. You're leaving with exactly what you brought into this marriage. No alimony. No settlement, no payout. You are leaving with nothing. Her knees buckled. She actually swayed, grabbing the edge of a high-top table to keep from collapsing. The color had drained so completely from her face she looked like a corpse. I straightened up and turned back to the room. I smoothed the silk of my emerald dress, looking every bit the queen who had just beheaded the traitors in the town square. Security, I called out, my voice ringing clear and authoritative. Two massive men in black suits materialized from the crowd, flanking the sobbing couple. Please escort these trespassers off the property, I said, checking my watch. And ensure they don't take the silverware on their way out. The sound that ripped out of Jordan's throat wasn't human. It wasn't a cry, and it wasn't a sob. It was a guttural, high-pitched keen that sounded like metal shearing against metal. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire future incinerate in front of 300 witnesses. I watched unmoving as the reality of her destitution hit her nervous system. She dropped the eviction notice. It fluttered to the marble floor, landing face up in a puddle of spilled Pinot Noir. She clawed at the air, her fingers hooking into the sleeve of Marcus's jacket, but he was too busy trying to keep his own balance to hold her up. No, she shrieked, her voice cracking into a desperate wail. You can't do this. I live here. This is my house. It never was, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through her screaming like a razor. The security team didn't hesitate. These weren't the standard event staff I usually hired for cocktail parties. These were private contractors, ex-military men I paid a premium to ensure that when I said remove, the object was removed. One of the guards, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, stepped between Marcus and me. He didn't touch Marcus aggressively, he just occupied the space with such overwhelming physical dominance that Marcus shrank. "Sir," the guard said, his voice flat and bored, "it's time to go." Marcus tried to muster one last scrap of dignity. He straightened his lapels, his face a mottled map of red rage and white shock. He looked at the crowd, his golf buddies, his investors, the people he had spent 20 years trying to impress. They were all holding up their phones. The flashes were blinding. It looked like a strobe light show. Every grimace, every bead of sweat on his forehead, every second of his humiliation was being live-streamed to the very social circles he worshipped. He wasn't just losing his job and his wife, he was becoming a meme. "Odessa, tell them to stop," Marcus pleaded, his voice thin and reedy. He pointed a shaking finger at the phones. This is slander. I'll sue every single one of you." "It's not slander if it's true, Marcus," I replied, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. The bubbles burst against my tongue, crisp and cold. "And the truth is you're trespassing." The guard placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. It looked gentle, but I saw Marcus's knees buckle under the pressure. He was being steered, not guided. Jordan was less cooperative. She had collapsed to her knees, ruining the hem of her stolen designer gown in the wine spill. She was hyperventilating, her mascara running in thick black rivers down her cheeks. She looked up at me, her face contorted into a mask of pure hatred and panic. "I'll kill you," she screamed, lunging forward. The crowd gasped, recoiling as one entity. Two guards intercepted her before she made it 3 feet. They hoisted her up by her arms. Her feet kicked uselessly in the air, her heels scraping against the floor. She was flailing like a trapped bird. Get off me," she screeched. "Marcus, do something." But Marcus was already halfway to the door, his head hung low, flanked by security. He didn't look back, he didn't fight for her. When the ship sank, the rat didn't try to save the cargo, he just tried to save himself. I watched the realization hit Jordan that she was utterly alone. Her wailing shifted from anger to a hollow, desolate sobbing that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. It was pathetic, it was ugly, and I enjoyed every second of it. I tracked their progress across the ballroom. The sea of guests parted for them, creating a wide berth. No one offered a hand, no one offered a sympathetic glance. These were sharks and they smelled blood in the water. Jordan and Marcus were tainted meat. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the room swung open. The night air rushed in, swirling the hem of my dress. The guards shoved them out into the darkness. I saw Marcus stumble on the threshold. I saw Jordan trip, landing on the gravel driveway. Then the doors slammed shut with a final resonant boom. The lock clicked. Silence rushed back into the room, but it wasn't the tense silence of before. It was the silence of a vacuum after the storm has passed. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of adrenaline and triumph, but my hands were perfectly steady. I felt light. I felt buoyant. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't carrying the dead weight of a lying husband and a treacherous friend. I looked around the room. 300 faces were staring at me, waiting for my reaction. They were terrified of me. I could see it in their eyes. They had just watched me dismantle 2 lives with the precision of a surgeon, and they were wondering if they were next. Good, let them fear me. I walked over to the nearest waiter, a young man who looked like he was about to faint from the excitement. I placed my empty glass on his tray and picked up a fresh one. I turned back to the crowd. I didn't smile. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't need to. "The bar is open for another hour," I announced, raising my glass. "And the band has been paid for the night. Enjoy the evening." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the grand staircase, the marble cool and solid beneath my feet. I didn't run. I ascended slowly, one step at a time, listening to the jazz band tentatively start playing again. The music swelled, drowning out the murmurs that were starting to ripple through the room. I reached the landing and looked down one last time. The party was restarting, awkward and hesitant, but restarting nonetheless. The ecosystem was correcting itself. I walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom, my bedroom. The house was quiet up here. It smelled of lilies and old money. I walked to the window and looked down at the driveway. I saw the taillights of a taxi fading into the distance. Security hadn't even let them take one of the cars. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. A profound, bone-deep sense of peace settled over me. The checking accounts were empty, the offshore trust was full, and the title deed was safe in my safe deposit box. The house was mine. The money was safe, and the trash had finally been taken out. I'm Odessa Thorne, 42 years old, and I am the sole owner of a quiet, luxurious life that cost exactly $3.2 million to secure. I sat on the edge of the infinity pool, letting my legs dangle into the cool, turquoise water. The air here in the Maldives smells different than the stagnant, recycled air of the life I left behind. It smells of deep salt, expensive jasmine, and absolute silence. The sun was beginning its slow, dramatic descent into the Indian Ocean, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and burnt orange. It was beautiful, but for the first time in years, I wasn't taking a picture of the view to prove to anyone that I was happy. I was just watching it. My phone vibrated against the teak wood of the patio table. It was a single, short buzz. I didn't rush to pick it up. I took a slow sip of my iced tea, tasting the condensation on my lips before I reached for the device. The screen was bright against the dimming light. It was an email from my attorney, flagged as high priority. Subject, verdict delivered. I opened the message. My heart didn't race, my palms didn't sweat. My pulse remained as steady as the tide lapping against the stilts of my villa. Guilty on all counts. Marcus was facing 3 years in a federal facility for embezzlement. The forensic accountants I had quietly hired, the ones who traced the business trips that were actually vacations with Jordan, had found more than just hotel receipts. They found the holes in his company's ledger. When I handed that file over to the authorities a week after the divorce was finalized, I wasn't just a scorned wife. I was a concerned citizen performing a civic duty. I swiped out of the email and opened a different folder. This one wasn't from a lawyer. It was from a private investigator I kept on a low-level retainer just to tie up loose ends. There was a photo attached, taken yesterday. It showed a woman standing behind the counter of a dingy coffee shop in a strip mall 3 towns over. Her hair, once blown out to glossy perfection, was pulled back in a messy, practical bun. She was wearing a stained green apron. The fluorescent lights washed her out, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes and the new harsh lines around her mouth. Jordan. The report below the photo was brief. She was living in a 400-square-foot studio apartment above a garage. She was working 2 jobs, the coffee shop in the morning and a call center at night, just to make rent. Her credit was shot. Her reputation in our social circle was radioactive. The friends she thought she had stolen along with my husband had dropped her the moment the credit card stopped working. I zoomed in on her face in the photo. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who had aged 10 years in 6 months. She looked like a woman who had learned the hard way that being the other woman is a position with zero job security. I set the phone down, face down. I didn't feel a surge of malicious glee. I didn't feel the urge to laugh. I just felt a profound, heavy sense of balance. The scales of the universe had been tipped wildly against me for a decade, and I had simply forced them back into alignment. I stood up, the water sluicing off my skin. The silk of my caftan caught the breeze, billowing around me like a sail. I walked over to the sliding glass doors that led into the villa. The glass was dark, turning into a mirror against the fading light outside. I stopped and looked at myself. For a long time, when I looked in the mirror, I saw a victim. I saw a woman who had been fooled. I saw a wife who wasn't enough, a friend who was too trusting, a fool who managed the household while the wolves ate at the table. But the woman staring back at me now was a stranger to that old version of Odessa. My skin was bronzed from weeks of sun. My shoulders were back, not burdened by the weight of a dying marriage. My eyes were clear, sharp, and terrifyingly calm. I touched my own reflection, pressing my fingertips against the cool glass. I had the money. The 3.2 million was sitting in a diversified portfolio in the Cayman Islands, accruing interest every second I stood here. But the money was just a tool. The real victory was the silence in my head. The anxiety was gone. The constant, gnawing suspicion was gone. The revenge hadn't just broken them, it had forged me. I turned away from the glass and walked into the massive, open-concept living room. A bottle of vintage champagne was chilling in a silver bucket on the island, a complimentary gift from the resort management. I popped the cork. The sound was a sharp crack that echoed through the empty villa. I poured a single glass. Bubbles fizzed, rising aggressively to the surface. I walked out to the deck, the wood warm beneath my bare feet. The sun was almost gone now, just a sliver of fire on the horizon. The first stars were beginning to puncture the purple canopy of the sky. I raised my glass to the empty ocean. To Marcus, I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. Enjoy the cell. I took a sip. To Jordan, I said, feeling the jasmine breeze brush my cheek. Enjoy the grind. I took another sip, larger this time. And to Odessa, I said, my voice strong, steady, and finally completely my own. I finished the glass. I was alone at the edge of the world, and for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't lonely. I was free. The game was over, and I had won.